Hello, everybody. Can we get everyone who is not a reader tonight to turn off their cameras and mute their microphones? You'll get a chance to show up later. And we will record the session, and we've actually started doing that. So, greetings. Thanks to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we've provided in the chat and by visiting our website, a link to which will be added to the chat real soon now. I am your host today, Sarah Smith, and you can find more about me and the other sponsors and volunteers of Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the provided handout. Please note that that recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars without permission, is illegal. So you'll get a chance to be able to see again any of the readings that we're doing today. Today we'll be featuring 6 authors: Laura Hill, A.E. Santana, Rebecca Scherm, Jessica Lewis, Jenna Moquin, and Marie Vibbert. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Laura Hill. Currently resident in Northern California, writing is a hobby, competing for Laura's spare time with photography and planting wildflowers. Her story, Stone Cold, was nominated by the editor for a pushcart, and she completed a creative writing course at Humber College in 2016. Laura, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Laura Hill. This reading is from Canyon City Choco, which is an alternate history steampunk, as published in the Dark Owl Past anthology, Something Wicked This Way Rides. This story is set in the traditional territory of the Kwanlundun First Nation, the Anquachin Council. Canyon City Chuckle. Heston's glass eyes rolled as black flies buzzed inside the green sapphire orbs. A fly landed to drink in the mucus that drained down his porcelain cheek. He blinked, feather lashes fluttering as he tried to focus. Chestnut hairs of his horsehair wig quivered. A chuckle rasped from Emo the innkeeper's belly and out whiskered jowls. Flies is bad this year. He stated the obvious and scratched a sweat-stained armpit. Gwendolyn's North Sea gray-green eyes scanned from Heston to Emil. That chuckle had the nervous but determined timbre of single men met in Egypt, Persia, India, Thailand, Japan, and home in England. Behind a facade of kindness, what they wanted was neither moral nor legal to any but themselves. Heston's joints squeaked as he shuffled his boots. Basalt and clay cliffs dropped sheer to a placid beaver pond, held across the breadth of the Yukon River by dams built of trees and boughs by mammoth reticent beaver. Water cascaded over a nitro-blown lake in the lower dam. The giant beaver, as long as her brother Merrill was tall and much wider, was not the reason she opted not to bathe in the pond. If she wanted water, she'd have to haul it, Emil had gloated, eyes on her bust. Gwendolyn preferred to be unbathed and was still cleaner than the dirty lout. Give me a minute, Heston, she said, squeezing a rubber bulb as she opened a vent behind the curves of a china ear. What Merrill had done with an abacus, gear wheels, steam motor, rubber, and clay astounded her every day. She released the bulb and felt vibrations as flies sucked in. One more. Heston grunted and flexed his rubber fingers. Just like she had taught him to relax, intake of air with extended fingers, regularized compression with curled fingers to exhaust a puff of steam from his nostrils. Gwendolyn squeezed the bulb to blast the flies out. No point in robbing the local population of bats or birds of their dinner, she thought, as she stepped to place Heston between her and the smelly bulk of Emil. Whiskers twitching, a beaver peered over the two-scarred cottonwood of the lower dam near the break. He disappeared and returned, long teeth around a tree trunk, with a flip and a twist of the beam lodged in place and the flow reduced to a trickle. Gwendolyn smiled, her russet curls ruffled by a gust. Determination and ingenuity on a large scale, but not mild-mannered. This beaver was as determined as any gold miner to hold a stake. Emil growled his jaw to a square jut. Gossip said he had won Canyon City in a card game because he cheated. Others that the original city builder had lost the card game to be free of the beaver, selecting Emil for his successor because of a threat made to his wife. No amount of nitro would dislodge the giant rodent's architecture. Only a jar thrown down an open throat would have any effect. She hoped the beaver had a strong gag reflex and imagined Emil spiraling in the air with a pictured landing on a boggy shore. A smile curled one corner of her lip. Where did Merrill go? Heston teetered as he stepped around a cluster of head-sized pink-fleshed mushrooms that sprouted beneath a gold-leaf birch to see more of the grounds and surrounding bluffs. Emil snorted and lumbered away to a storage shed. No doubt her pastor father would have something to say about her wish to see him blown skyward by nitro. Perhaps some wishes were too extreme to come true. Heston twitched a mosquito off his painted eyebrow. He's looking for a way through, she said, or around, or over. She finished with raised eyebrows. Is that Merrill? Heston manually adjusted his binocular vision to the top of the opposite cliff. I hope he has no intention of flying, Gwendolyn murmured as her brother stood feet together, arms flapping. Arms that long might fly with a greatcoat spread, she thought. He's not going to jump, is he? Heston swayed on the tips of his muddy boots. I doubt it. Merrill has proven to be quite attached to life, she answered. He, steam puffed out, leaving a soot ring round Heston's nostrils. He quite gets up to things, you know. His workshop, inventions, his travels. Heston looked away from Merrill to the shed Emil had gone into. Gwendolyn followed his gaze and looked back at Merrill again. Perhaps he'd crossed the river in their longboat or had dared to meet the giant beaver on its dam. Little more than a year ago, he had stood still in a desert gloaming as a maned lion watched him with fire flicks in its eyes. These Yukon beavers were almost as big as hippos and just as volatile. Merrill stopped flapping and stepped away from the edge. An eagle soared above him and turned into a mocking spiral. Able to match wit and cunning with anyone or animal, he had not yet attempted flight. Are we going to fly to the Klondike? Heston scratched at a port behind his ear. We'll see what Merrill has in mind. The longboat won't make it past the beaver dams, Gwendolyn said, as Emil came out of the shed at a heel-to-toe pace, with a jar balanced on his uplifted palm. Well, everybody else has been getting past this, he sputtered and jerked. Obstacle? Yes, on an expensive tram and switch to other transport on the other side. I'd have to leave all my sketchbooks and architectural drafts behind. Everybody but the gold miners are making money in this boom. She wondered if she and Merrill owned Canyon City by default, if Emil blew himself up while they were here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Our second reader is A.E. Santana. Whoa, what a cover. A.E. Santana's work can be found in Latinx Screams and other horror anthologies. She is the managing editor for Kelp Journal and the moderator for a horror book club. She is a member of the Horror Writers Association. She received her MFA in fiction from the University of California, Riverside. A.E., over to you.
Thank you. My name is A.E. Santana, and I'm reading an excerpt from my short story, Imperial Slaughterhouse. Lucia's hand twitched to turn the air on in her truck, but remembered the AC no longer worked. Another recent issue of the old Chevy. She took a breath. The wind blowing in from the open window shot down her throat in a warm gust. In late July, on State Highway 86, from Coachella to El Centro, the desert tasted like a baked, fishy piece of wood. Past the Salton Sea, the world would become a stretch of road flanked by desert, rimmed in rocky foothills. Lucia licked her dry lips. The garbagey stench would eventually transform into the aroma of farmland, dry hay, Sudan, alfalfa, livestock, and the occasional burnt field that replenished the land, the smells of home. The underdeveloped desert forced strange thoughts into Lucia's head. Gnomes, monsters, ghosts. As a kid, her mother told her stories about El Cucuy, the boogeyman, in the closet or under the bed. Those tales were frightening and fun until Lucia shook the memory away. There were more important things happening. Her father was dying. Desert gave way to farmland. Lucia flew through the smaller agricultural towns and fields of produce. She trudged into El Centro, the city she was born and raised in, 10 miles from the US-Mexico border. She pulled up to her parents' makeshift gate that surrounded the family's house and yard. She got out of the truck, the sun baking her skin, opened the gate, and got back into the truck. She parked underneath the homemade overhang, wooden beams for columns worn down from weather and age, and a tin roof rusted and sharp. She grabbed a knapsack from the back seat and headed into her childhood home. Mama! Lucia opened the front door and peeked into the living room. Mama! She closed the door behind her, the cool air kissing her hot skin. She moved toward the bedrooms to drop off her pack. Mom! Lucita! Her mother's voice drifted from the master bedroom. Oh, mija, I'm so glad you're here. Lucia walked into her parents' bedroom. Her mother, smaller, grayer than her last visit, sat on the edge of the bed with a deep blue handmade quilt that Lucia had used to lay on the ground and pretend was the ocean. Lucia sat next to her mother and embraced her. Her mother's hugs always seemed to chase away the stress and darkness that followed her. How are you doing? Lucia asked. She gripped her mother tighter, hoping to give the frail woman some of her own strength. Her mother, Rocio Luz Santiago Dominguez, shrugged her tiny shoulders beneath her daughter's arms. I'm doing, Rocio said. It's lonely here with your father in the hospital. Are you ready to go? Before Lucia answered, her mother pulled out of her arms and was up. I wanted to freshen up, Lucia said. I just drove 100 miles with no AC, so I'm kind of sweaty and gross. She ignored that she and her mother had just self-consciously embraced a moment ago. Your father doesn't care, Lucia said, grabbing a soft yellow cardigan that had been lying on the bed. But it's cold in the hospital, so bring a jacket. Mom, Lucia said, it's 109 degrees outside. Let me just rinse off, at least. I've waited all day, Lucia said. Your father is in the hospital. She was already getting her purse. He'd be happy to be driving around in the heat. At the hospital, Lucia and her mother entered floor 12. Lucia stared at the vinyl flooring as she shuffled her hands in her jean pockets, unprepared for the hospital's cold. Rafael, Rocio said. She darted over to her husband who sat in bed. She patted the old man's hand. Lucia is here. Lucia moved into his line of sight before her mother could snap at her. Lucia looked down at her father. Rafael Marcos Dominguez. He looked shrunken and thin. His legs seemed too short and small underneath the hospital covers. Her father's dark skin was ashen, and blotchy dark circles swam under his eyes. His hair, previously luxurious and black, with only speckles of gray, was gone. His lips drew together in a thin, choppy line. He opened his hazel eyes, tired, but still so light and beautiful. He coughed. The movement seemed to wrap his whole body. Lucia grimaced. This was her third visit to see her father in the hospital, and each time he looked reduced, as if he was disappearing. Good, Lucia thought. Papa, Lucia said, her voice calm and even. The man blinked his weary eyes and focused their beauty on his daughter. Lucita, he said, it's good to see you, mija. Lucia's feet were stuck to the floor, her hands balled into fists in her pockets. You too, Dad. Rafael turned to his wife, who vigilantly stood next to him, her hands over his. Rocio, mi amor, he said, give me some time with my daughter, please. She patted her husband's wrinkled and spotted hand. I'll be back in a moment, Rocio shuffled out, leaving Lucia in the hospital with her dying father. They were quiet for a moment. Rafael let out a sigh and shifted, uncomfortable in the bed. He straightened and looked at Lucia, his eyes suddenly distant and empty. Are you being a good girl? He asked. Lucia nodded. She stayed put, 2 feet away from the foot of his bed. Always? My little angel, he said, the one who will take me to heaven. Lucia held back a sneer. She thought about his heavy blows across her mother's face, across her own face, bruised limbs, the slashes over her back. Come here, my angel, Rafael said. Lucia bit back the urge to tell him to screw off. She moved forward, stiff and awkward in bitterness. Rafael saw the hardness in his startled eyes, a mirror of his own. A smirk danced over his once handsome features. Lucita, he said, you will take me to heaven. She wanted to stay more than an arm's length from him. Although he was shriveled and weak, memories of his lightning-fast movements floated in her brain. She shrugged. Sure. Do you remember, Rafael said, when we were rich? Do you remember the big house with the pool and the tree house? Remember all the cars? Your big room with all your friends who used to come and eat all the food? Lucia gave a short nod. I paid for that, he said. I know. Rafael leaned back in the bed. We had it all. His eyes went skyward in nostalgia. Before your Tío Flaco screwed us. Tío Flaco, Thomas Renato Santiago, her mother's brother. Tío Flaco with dark eyes and an infectious laugh. Tío Flaco who always had a silly story and never hit or slapped. Tío Flaco who had said, do you know why they call you Lucia? Because you have a light inside of you. Tío Flaco who had been missing since she was 8 years old. Her father sighed, good for nothing bastard. I paid for it all, and I lost it all. Rafael trained his eyes back on his daughter. All I have is you. You'd have to read the whole story to find out what happens. Thank you.
Very, very nice. Can't wait to find out what happened to her. Our third reader is Rebecca Scherm. Rebecca Scherm, oh, love that cover, is the author of the novels A House Between Earth and the Moon and Unbecoming. She lives in Palo Alto, California. Take it away, Rebecca.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. So I'm here reading from A House Between Earth and the Moon, which takes place in 2033. And it's about a group of mostly ordinary scientists who are the first inhabitants of a residential luxury space station that was built as a bolt hole for billionaires. The space station is funded by a telecom giant called Census, who is putting our phones into our ears and shortening the distance between us and our technology. In the excerpts that I'm going to read today, this is when one of the last of the newcomers comes to Parallaxis, which is the name of the space station, or rather when she's recruited for it. Her name is Tess, and she is a young social psychologist. And the piece I'm going to read is from chapter 3. And this is when Tess is recruited to Census. Tess expected to hear from Census someday. She knew they would want her, and she looked forward to turning them down. She was a research scientist at Caltech now, and her first study there on how a group of 6-year-old children agreed to include or exclude a newcomer to a game had gotten some attention. Her methods, tracking the eye movements of the children as they checked each other for agreement and discord, had gotten more. When Census finally called her, the recruiter wouldn't say what the project was. Tess resisted his first 2 attempts, and then he alluded to a human data set that he was certain would interest her, specifically if she were willing to come in to discuss it in person. Tess's heartbeat sped up, and those familiar prickles stung her palms. For a human data set to be enticing, rich for discovery, the fact that it existed at all had to be uncomfortable, even a little wrong. You could know in your heart it should not exist, but it made that same heart beat a little faster. Tess took the meeting. She didn't tell anyone. The morning of her appointment, Tess fussed over her appearance. She tucked her short, dark hair behind her ears, and then her ears were sticking out like an elf. She stared at the pimple in the middle of her chin, so large it seemed to have an areola, annoyed that she suddenly cared about it. They wanted her. She was just taking a meeting. But whomever she was meeting today, fuck them already for making her worry about how she looked. The census recruiter was older than she was, somewhere in his 30s. Hard to tell with skin that nice. As he led Tess across the census campus, her phone stopped working. Her dashboard was gone. All she saw was the back of the recruiter, the paths in front of her, the low black buildings surrounding them. Tess hadn't been without her dashboard in 8 years. Even her dreams had a dashboard. The only sounds she could hear were outside her clogs clomping down the path behind the recruiter, a distant door sliding open and closed. She had entered, for the very first time, a private space. "What level is this?" she asked. "Privacy, I mean?" "Our people start at V and go up from there," he said. "The whole campus is X, though." She wanted to ask him what level he had, but it seemed rude in this context, like asking him how important he was. He smiled. "Enjoy the quiet," he said. He left her in a small meeting room furnished with just 2 chairs and a round table between them. 10 minutes passed before the door opened again. The woman who came in was holding 2 mugs of tea. She was fine-lined and a little plump, wearing glasses and a faded navy blue sweater that showed the thick straps of her sports bra. Her black hair was in a sloppy ponytail, the home kind of ponytail that people made without realizing it. She didn't look like someone who could work at census. "Oh, thank you," Tess said when the woman handed her the mug of tea. "Could you tell me who I'm waiting for?" "You're waiting for me," the woman said, sitting down across from Tess. "I'm Catherine Son." Tess's face must have betrayed her surprise, because the woman smiled in what Tess would soon understand was satisfaction. "I know you didn't expect to meet me, and you didn't think I'd look like I do." "I don't know what you look like," Tess said without thinking. "No one does." 42, Korean American, this was the only public information about Catherine Son's appearance. "My sister is the face of our company," Catherine Son said, "and the voice." She laughed, a soft huff that seemed to Tess both genuine and practiced, routine. "I never think about it at all. Don't have to." She glanced down at Tess's pimple, which had been poked and squeezed into new prominence only an hour earlier. "Can you imagine the freedom?" "It's power," she said, lightly pressing her fingertips onto the glass table. "To transcend, bypass image entirely." "No one knows what you look like?" Tess asked. "Sure they do while they're with me," she said. "You do right now. And you'll have your biological memory, but you can't carry my image with you, no." "Is that because you're privatized?" Tess asked. "I didn't think privatized people were exempt from..." "No, tons of people are privatized. I'm something else. But I'm not why you came today, am I?" Tess blushed. "No, that's good. That's how I like it. You're here because you want to know about views." Census phones recorded and archived everything a user saw. Census had each and every user's life exactly as lived in its possession, their views. The time had come to examine those lives, to process them. Tess wasn't surprised. Views or something like it had been a sci-fi fantasy or nightmare in the public imagination for as long as she could remember. The idea that everyone might be spied upon by someone else, someone or something more powerful to influence you, protect you, control you. When she was a kid, her parents had placed stickers over their laptop cameras and whispered to hide from their virtual assistants. But listening to and looking at census users was nothing new. What Catherine Son described was something different, looking through. "Views are the core of human individuality," Catherine said. "Look around you right now. How much can I learn about you from what and who is in your field of vision right this second? How much more can I learn by watching what your eye lingers on, what you notice or don't in your own environment? That's views. All that you see from your own eyes, the unique way that you see it, how you see it, who you are. What do you want me for? Tess asked, even though she knew. At this point, we've got 700 beta algorithms working together to process views and interpret them. My team has gotten to where the algo can predict the most obvious user choices. It's about as smart as your average 5-year-old. 5-year-olds can predict a lot, Tess said. They can make a deal. They know you're not going to keep a promise if you haven't kept it before. Yeah, said Catherine. But the algo should know whether you're going to follow through, and if you even mean to before you know, the first time. Do you see? I'm going to stop there. I don't think I'm spoiling too much to say that the human data set that is proposed to Tess is too much for her to resist, and she becomes ensnared in this experiment herself.
Of course she does. And there is the beginning of a horrible, horrible experience. Which
Yeah,
we
there.
did. Yeah. Our fourth reader is Jessica Lewis. She's joining us with audio only, so don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your screen. Jessica Lewis is a Black author and receptionist. She has a degree in English literature and animal science. The veterinarian part hasn't worked out yet. She lives with her way funnier than her grandmother in Alabama. Her debut novel is Bad Witch Burning. And she has another YA horror, Monstrous, forthcoming in Fall 2023. Jessica, it's all yours.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I'll be reading from Bad Witch Burning, which is my debut novel, and I'll just start at chapter 1. It's about a girl who can raise the dead for money. I'm painting Will's nails when she asked me to talk to her dead grandma. Didn't we talk to her last week? I don't look up from my work as I paint a coat of hot pink. Will's nails are short and brittle from nervous chewing, so it takes extra effort to make them look good. It's been a month, I think. Her voice is a hesitant whisper. Cottrell, please. I want to tell her about the contest. I finished the second layer before looking up at her. Will's eyes search mine, brimming with cautious excitement. She's always like this, desperately hopeful, but expecting someone to crush her at the same time. Will's big, not just heavy, but physically imposing. 5'10", huge arms that could hurt someone if she wanted, but she sits with her shoulders hunched like she's trying to take up as little space as possible. A bear who doesn't know she's been let out of her cage. I lean forward and blow gently on her nails. I'll do it for her. Summonings aren't difficult, and Will never asks for much. At least she has someone to summon. My only family is Mom. I don't have aunts or cousins or dead grandmas. Will has a whole host of dead people to talk to. Sometimes I wonder which is better, dead family or no family at all. I lean back on my hands and study Will's face. She's looking down, her eyebrows scrunched, her hands clenched tightly around her knees. The wet polish glimmers in the lamplight. I can't let Clara, her grandma, see her wound up like this. Ghosts can be mean when they want to be, and I don't need Clara haunting me for a week because she thinks I upset Will. Time to ease the tension. I feel like the only reason you keep me around is because I can talk to your granny. Will rolls her eyes and her shoulders relax just a little. Whatever, you know that's not true. Then it's because I make your nails look like hot shit. I smile as she laughs, her shoulders relax even more. Emphasis on the shit part. Will shakes her hand delicately, still giggling. Conrad's looks better than this. My dog lifts his head from his massive paws, and his thick tail thumps on the carpet. We're in Will's room, so Conrad had been sleeping on the dog bed her parents bought him. We're always in Will's room. The cream-colored walls, canvases of Will's spray paint art, and the soft carpet feel like a second home. Way better than my leaky bathroom and secondhand mattress without a bed frame. Conrad yawns and stretches, favoring his back right leg, and makes a beeline for Will. Don't, Will warns, leaning backward, but it's too late. Conrad swipes his tongue over her nails, leaving streaks of pink polish up her hand. I laugh as Will jumps up, swearing under her breath, and Conrad turns to me. He pants and licks my face, a trail of drool stretching from my chin to my temple. God, Conrad, you're so gross. Go away. I I wipe my face with the sleeve of my sweater, giggling. He doesn't listen. Instead, he sits beside me and puts his heavy head on my shoulder, his dog breath wafting into my nose. Conrad is a mastiff mix, with tawny fur, floppy ears and jowls, and deep brown eyes. He's getting older, and longer walks make him limp. I hug his neck tightly, and he tries to lick my chin again. This giant, goofy mutt is one of the only things I have that's all mine. I'll take him, drool and all. Will grimaces as she rubs her hand on her pajama pants. I thought you trained him not to do that. I release Conrad from the hug and kiss his wet nose. He can't help it. He loves his Aunt Will. Will looks unimpressed, so I continue. Don't be mad at him. I'll fix your nails before Monday. Promise. Can't have him looking bad at school. Will shifts a little, not looking me in the eye. Her shoulders are tight again. About school. Why were you late yesterday? Was Gerald? No. I cut her off, the smile vanishing from my face in an instant. I don't even want to think about my mom's boyfriend with his bloodshot eyes and rancid breath. I dig my fingers into the plush carpet. Just overslept, and I wasn't late for work, which is what really matters. They're going to kick you out of school, you know. Good. I turned 16 a few weeks ago, so I just have one more year until I can drop out. The only thing holding me back is Will. I'd miss seeing her every day at lunch. That and most jobs won't give a full-time schedule to minors. I can't even lie about my age. I have a round, pudgy baby face that's ruined every fake idea I've ever tried to make. Will's got her disapproving. I know you're full of shit, Cottrell face on, so I changed the subject. Why do you want to talk to Clara again? About the contest? Will starts to answer, but we're cut off by my phone ringing. When I pull it out of my jacket pocket, my stomach sours. Gerald. Will and I stare at the phone until it stops buzzing. It immediately starts again. When it stops for the second time, there's a lull, and it starts right back up again. I silence the ringer, my fist clutching the phone so tight my knuckles hurt. Will watches me with a pitiful expression somewhere between anxiety and fear. The phone stops vibrating in my hand. A voicemail notification pops up. Will shakes her head. Just leave it, she says. She's practically begging. I can't leave it. Call it morbid fascination or self-loathing, but I always listen to his voicemails. I play it out loud. Damn girl never... Where are you? Huh? You ain't been back in days. He's drunk. His words are slurred and his voice thick. You gonna stop ignoring me, Cottrell. When you get back, we're getting your disrespect problem straightened out. There's a loud crash like he slammed his hand against the table, and the voicemail ends. Will meets my eyes like she wants to say something, so I grab my backpack. I don't want to think about Gerald. I come to Will's to get away from him, but he's always hanging over me like a shadow. He's like a living ghost, gaunt face and form at the edge of my vision, glaring at me. Except ghosts can't hurt you. Gerald can do a lot worse than watch me from the corner of my room. Let's talk to Granny, yeah? Okay, I'll stop there.
I love you characters. Very, very nice. Our fifth reader is Jenna Moquin. Jenna Moquin's stories and poetry have appeared in The Literary Hatchet, Asylum Inc., and Heater. In 2016, she released Safe, a collection of dark tales. Great cover. In 2021, she compiled a charity anthology of 1980s horror, Totally Tubular Terrors. She is a member of New England Horror Writers and proud aunt to 6 nieces and nephews. Jenna, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm actually going to be reading 2 excerpts, one from Safe and one from a poem I have coming out in the New England Horror Writers upcoming anthology, Wicked Sick. And I just got permission to share the cover, so I'm going to drop that in the chat for everybody. The poem is called Moon Sickness, and the anthology will be coming out this spring. There is something about this state, this time of the month, that makes me feel ethereal, that makes me feel in tune and at one with the moon, the earth, Mother Nature. Mother, may I feel this way? May I feel this earthen and dirty, and used and pure and cleansed, all at the same time? Is that allowed? Earthen and dirty, but cleansed from the rejoice, the rejuvenation. When it's all ended and over, I feel one again. I feel complete again. Made pure for the next journey that's not letting up. It's been over 30 years, and the bloodletting is not ending anytime soon. Showing up every 24 to 28 days, blowing up between the days of normalcy in my life, the 2 to 3 weeks per month when it feels like who I'm supposed to be. And when the moon sickness comes, the blood whooshes through from the womb, makes its way through and cleanses a sacred part of me. I'm no longer myself. I'm someone else, something else, and I like it. It's like I'm something that isn't quite real. It's like play acting in a way. This thing I'll do for just these few days, and then I'll be back to normal. Then I'll be back to myself, who I'm supposed to be. Maybe even go back to being the little girl who didn't know what a period was until I was too old to live in a little girl's world, telling myself it's just something that shows up once a month, like a bill I don't want to pay, a sacrificial blood rate of being this way. And I fucking love being a woman, even with the bullshit of what it means to be a woman in this world, even when it means I have no rights in this world. I'll fight until I bleed. I'm used to that anyway. And that's all I'm going to read from it because I can't read the whole thing, but it's a really good moment. You guys are going to love it when it comes out. The next thing I'll be reading is from an excerpt from my book of short stories, Safe. I will be doing a giveaway for it, 5 copies to people living in the US, along with some swag. The story I'm going to read from the collection is the title story, Safe, which is about a couple living in a post-apocalyptic world. Dana jumped up from the bed. We forgot to close the shade. Matt was jolted awake. He watched through the window as a sedan on the street below was lit on fire. He yanked down the window shade, hoping that anyone who might have noticed them was distracted by the burning car. They hurried through the rest of the apartment, making sure the curtains and shades were closed. Don't worry, Matt said. I doubt anybody saw us. Dana nodded and took a deep breath. They crept toward the window to peer outside at the fire. Surrounding the burning car was a group of men, all bare-chested and ragged-looking. Matt pulled her away from the window and brought her back to bed. He held her close and wrapped the blanket around them. As Dana drifted off, she heard a woman screaming in the distance. It took Matt longer to fall asleep. The sound of the woman's scream stayed with him for a while. He felt somewhat secured in the new hideout they'd found. As long as they didn't bring attention to themselves, no one would know they were here. And hopefully the government and military would get everything straightened out soon. He wanted nothing more than make his wife feel safe again. Over the next few days, they acted like they were on a relaxing vacation. They slept a lot and played with the marbles from the toy box. They invented a game with the gummy bears as a way to ration them, combined with rock, paper, scissors. The best 3 out of 5 got to pick which body part of the gummy bear the other got to eat. The feet, the head, or just nip off the ears, which was just a roundabout way of biting off the head. Every once in a while, they heard screams or a gunshot, and at one point they heard a woman scream so loud it sounded like it was right next door. One afternoon, after they shared a cold can of soup, Dana rummaged through her backpack to find one of the few items she'd salvaged from their house. It was her favorite wedding photo inside a monogrammed frame, a close-up angle of their smiling faces, and they were looking into each other's eyes instead of the camera. Dana traced Matt's face with her forefinger. She thought about their wedding day and how she had pictured their life together. Kids, a big house with a yard, Christmases and Halloween costumes. That future seemed impossible now. She felt a lump in her throat and tears in her eyes. Then her eyebrow shot up and she rushed to the kitchen. She opened up the safe underneath the sink. She placed their wedding photo next to the tools and locked the safe. For a moment, she kept her hand on top of it and shuddered. Matt walked into the kitchen and put his arm around her. Do you think life will ever go back to the way it was? She looked at him. I don't know. Matt stared at the wall as he spoke to her. Maybe it will. We'll just have to wait and see. He pulled her closer to him and squeezed. We'll get through this, Matt whispered. We always do. Dana smiled at him and he kissed her. She hoped if things ever went back to normal, they could try having a family. She'd picture it whenever Matt held her. She'd close her eyes and see them with their kids, a boy and a girl, pushing them on swings, smiling and laughing. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away from them. She knew they would eventually run out of food and wasn't sure what would happen then. They went to the bedroom and went underneath the blanket, though all they did was hold each other. They held each other for so long they drifted into a deep sleep and night fell around them. They had left the bedside table lamp on earlier. Even though the shade was half drawn, the light shined a beam onto the dark street below. When Dana woke up, she noticed the light and jolted out of bed. In her haste to turn off the lamp, she knocked it over, then rushed over to the window. Matt followed her. Dana peered outside. On the ground below stood a row of 5 bulky men wielding guns and crowbars. The one in the middle pointed up at her. They began chanting, pumping their weapons up and down. Dana jumped back from the window, but she knew it was too late. They'd been spotted. Matt ran to the front door, checking the security of the boards. They suddenly looked a lot weaker than they did when he'd first boarded up the door. Dana was behind him, and they heard the men running up the stairs, hollering as they got closer. Her eyes widened as she looked at her husband. Matt glanced around at the side table by the door. Maybe we could put something up against it. Dana shook her head and her shoulders slumped. She began to tremble. They heard the pounding against the door, and the floor beneath them shook. And that's the only extra I'm going to read. You have to get the book to hear the rest of it. Thank you.
Oh dear, don't stop there. Our final reader is Marie Vibbert. Marie Vibbert, ooh, look at that cover, is the Hugo Longlist Award author of over 80 short stories and 3 novels. Her work has been reprinted in Czech, Chinese, and Vietnamese and called Everything Science Fiction Should Be by the Oxford Culture Review. By day, she's a computer programmer in Cleveland, Ohio. Marie.
Okay, I'm taking it away. My giveaway is for my debut novel, Galactic Hellcats. So sign up and you can get a copy of this sweet bad boy. I will be reading from The Gods Awoke. I'm going to read from the end of chapter 3. And what you need to know at this point is that about a day of action has happened. There was a miraculous calm of fire. Nobody knows why, including our protagonist, Sene, who thinks she's a goddess and can hear everybody's thoughts. Also, most people in this story are telepathic. Okay. Night is never as calm as it looks. Insomniacs stare at walls. Delivery men go about finishing the day's work or getting a start on the next. My sisters wander the sky, passing through dreams and prayers and fears. They're getting more distinct now, but still wavering like figures seen through sheets of ice. I'm waiting to approach them until I have some solid knowledge, some advantage to use. They would be expecting tricks from me. Looking out on the deserted High Street circle beyond Penitent's Gate, which was closed, separating the temple from the city for the night, a man stood with a placard around his neck and crystal lanterns at his feet. The candles cast small circles of warmth and color in an area made large and gray by night. The placard said, "The gods have had enough. Sinners, make peace." The last 3 words were cramped, peace especially being near illegible, squeezed into the last bit of space. The effect was as if the idea was fizzling out. He had been surrounded by others all day, other placards, other candles, other signs. He was proud to have lasted into the night. He was also cold, tired, alone, and wondering if he was wrong. In the Middle City Hospital, an old man screamed, certain he was dying. The night nurse was more certain he was not. The trouble in his stomach was understood, but though a hospital full of telepaths really would rather give him the teas that cause sleep and ease pain, the decision had been made that such were too dangerous for this patient because of his age. The night nurse had explained this to him many times and gave him a bag of soothing salts to smell and an extra blanket. But still he howled as much as his breath allowed, pausing now and again as a child would to regain his strength, annoyance his only weapon against the cruel and uncaring nurses. So much misery, and no one was doing anything about it. It took just a pinch of my will, compressing the airway inside his throat, to halt him, and his body settled gently into the sweat-stained pillows. He should have had a soul, something freed from his suffering, floating out and away. But somehow I missed it. Chapter 4, visitation. Somehow, I missed it. In the watery pre-dawn light, Hitra stumbled out of her bathroom. She closed the door and then turned and put her hand on it, as though surprised it was solid. Eloy came into the bedroom, stopped and turned his head aside, then looked again, just long enough to verify that his mistress was in fact naked. His blood rushed to his skin and parts of him swelled, and he felt the nearness of her, the air on her skin, and he was hyper aware of the horror that his body was reacting and she would see. All of this was swirling inside of him, but she simply stared at her hand on the wood of the door, wondering at the ordinariness of both. The time at which it was appropriate to say something passed. Eloy cleared his throat, and Hitra, for the first time, noticed that he was there. "I heard voices," he said. She pointed at the door. He reached for it. "No!" she cried, but he opened it, and she was startled by the steamy view of ceramic-coated brick, the recessed tub in the floor, with the water mirror still. The room was empty. Eloy peered into each corner and returned with a towel. His emotions were squirming around in his mind, and thoughts about propriety and where to set his eyes and how to pretend you don't notice wet, bare flesh in front of you. It helped that she was so obviously distressed. He set his eyes on hers, which were darting around frightened. His eyebrows, which I found pretty and dark, crinkled together. "Are you all right?" Her thoughts were too disordered for me to pick them apart. "What did you see?" For an anxious second, he thought she meant what he saw of her body, but then his mind caught up. "In the bathroom? Was it a spider? A snake? I didn't see anything." Hitra sat down at her desk. Her hands shook. She took out a fresh parchment and overturned the stylus jar. Eloy went into the bathroom again. She heard him drain the tub and run a brief spate of water. The sound was exactly normal, the groan of metal, the high-pitched squeak, the silver cold rush of water. She fumbled with the stylus, trying to fit it into its cleaner. It clattered to the desk, playing out a series of nulls and sets like footprints as it rolled. She grasped her hands together to stop them from shaking and looked down. "I'm naked." "I noticed," Eloy said. He tossed her robe to her. It fluttered open and sailed briefly, but caught against some unseen thickness of the air, not me, and fell into a curve of white on the patterned carpet. Eloy rubbed his nose, feeling helpless even to hand a robe properly. I'll go wait in the anteroom." "No!" Eloy was hopelessly confused. Hitra was way too upset for it to be a random bug. "Hitra, really, what's wrong? Just don't leave me alone right now." She crossed a hand over her breasts and picked up the robe. I'm sorry, I don't know what." She shrugged into the robe and stared at the bathroom door. It was open. Inside, the same ordinary light reflected condensation on the brass fittings and glass tile. She tied her robe. "I'll get you some tea," Eloy said, "and tell Mady you can't make your breakfast meeting." "No, Hitra." He crossed the space between them and retied her robe properly so that the knot was not on its side. "The fire pantry is right there. I'll be in earshot the entire time. You need tea." Her waist was constricted under the sash. He had tied it tighter than she would have. She touched the satin bow, flattening it to her stomach. "Yes, good, thank you. Eloy, A single droplet of moisture ran down the bathroom wall over the tub, collecting smaller droplets as it fell. The wall was unquestionably solid, but she expected it to tear at any moment like film. Why did she think that? She turned her head to the left and saw the red brick of the fire pantry. Likewise, it was solid. She sighed. "I'll get dressed." She watched Eloy test the fullness of the tea kettle with a perverse feeling like she wasn't controlling her own actions. She walked into the bathroom and touched the wall. She pressed her fingers until they turned white and then pink under the nails. She went to her chest of clothes and opened it. This was maddening. I am supposed to know everything, but I couldn't know what had happened if she wouldn't think about it. And I'll end off there. So that's just a little taste of The Gods Awoke and all of the mysteries that our goddess character is facing.
Oh, thank you, Marie. And thank you so much to everyone who came today.